We'll be moving on to our last presentation of the day. We'll be having Mr. Prasad Ramakrishnan, who is the global leader and change agent with over 24 years of proven success in manufacturing, supply chain, and product development in the automotive and fashion apparel industries. He is the head of global manufacturing for Triumph, and today he will be speaking about transforming a leading global manufacturing company's ecosystem and culture into an outstanding global supply chain competitive advantage. Thank you.
Thanks. I know this is difficult, the last presentation of the day, and I've got 19 minutes and 37 seconds, but let me ask if you can all just get up for a second. Just get up, stretch. Just because it's difficult sitting, right? And now, please sit back. Don't leave the room yet. And let me try to keep this as engaging as I can. The summary of this title is simply Transforming Global Manufacturing. And you'll probably see a lot of commonality between presentations. I learned something from the previous presentation, Alexander, so thank you for that. In my case, the presentation is fairly simple. I'm going to talk about the challenge from two different roles, then talk about what are the results, and then talk about maybe 6 points to keep in mind in terms of the journey and how it was accomplished. So to begin with, I had about 19 years in Ford Motor Company, and towards the end there, the last 4.5 years were to set up literally the entire South America Advanced and Manufacturing Engineering Organization. This was a fairly large challenge. As you can see, there are a lot of different departments that are affected. There are different functions, and you're trying to set up a process that will work in Brazil, in Venezuela, and Argentina. This was also something that you had to do while the ship was sailing. In other words, build the ship while it is sailing, because there were vehicles to be launched, disciplines to be put in place, and a business to be transformed. Now, the normal career path, of course, is after you're manufacturing cars, you go to manufacture bras. So I'm the head of global production for Triumph, which is a global company, which is a leader in lingerie. And in the role here, because it's a 126-year plus company, it meant that there were strong disciplines, starting with the German tradition that has been the founders. The owners are still the same family, fourth generation. And so it was trying to take more than 10 different cultures and 30,000 people who worked in them and try to get them to be one single global team, which also meant that we had to re-engineer processes that were long-standing, try to bring in good KPIs, and then try to also improve performance and develop the leadership, which was pretty critical. So what are the results? I'll just go straight to the punchline and then talk about the journey. The results were fairly straightforward. In Ford, on the one hand, it was interesting that the people who were in the organization were not only respected by other departments in South America, they were also respected by the people in Ford in other parts of the world. This was important because as product engineering was developing in South America and manufacturing engineering was developing, this was a time between 2004 and 2008 when Ford really succeeded in South America and then had the foundation to stay. So it also became an organization that was critical to develop products and send them out as a supplier of choice. Obviously, at the bottom, because of the technical challenges involved, we needed to also increase our Six Sigma leadership. So over a course of 3 years, really getting the green belt and black belt really implemented in a way that could last. So let me go into also the transformation results from Triumph. We had, obviously, the metrics that everybody in supply chain and manufacturing normally looks at, right? SQDC. You can see there were tremendous changes in terms of where we went from 2008 to 2012. Also, we delivered bottom line results, the annual savings of 50 million plus Swiss francs, and strong development, and at the bottom where it's getting a little bit cut off, management, talent management, at least at the top 3 levels, and then build it to be implemented in every plant. So let me then lay out the six points I wanted to lay out. The first one, as a leader coming into a change, it's important to set a new standard. But set a new standard for something that everybody recognizes as a clear priority, and then help the people to have an early victory. In this particular case, with Ford, it had to do with really helping the team understand what it means to successfully launch a product. Many times, there is a phenomenon that many of you would have seen, that a team under pressure seems to know what is the answer before they fully define what is the problem. So teaching people the fundamentals of how to go why, teaching people the fundamentals of how to know if they've really got to the root cause, how they're going to prevent recurrence, this is very critical in something like launching a new vehicle. On the other side, in Triumph, since structure drives behavior, the early challenge was to take the leaders from the global organization and get the leadership to understand how they could become a single global community of leaders and all of the benefits in it. Doing these two things early is what we're calling the laser focus on a priority, which is an early victory. That then allows you to go to step 2, which is to replicate what you've done for impact in the entire system. In the case of the launch, taking what was developed in Brazil, along with a leader who had been developed as the South America launch leader, and then going to Venezuela, going to Argentina, and replicating the process, it took more than a year, but it had a lot of credibility, and then you start to get the benefits of standardization. You hear the phrase that a journey of 1,000 steps starts with step 1, but what about step 2 and 3 and so on? If I take the example of Six Sigma implementation over 3 years in 5 different locations in 3 different countries, it starts for the leader to actually show the commitment to help the people by picking something. In the case of Six Sigma, define, measure, and so on, picking define meant that you had to spend time, I had to spend time every week reviewing projects and making sure that the define step was correct. And over a course of a year, you're looking at hundreds of projects, but that's how you make sure people understand really what is defined, and then you replicate it again and again and again. So it's a journey, but if you don't do that, you cannot actually teach people how to move from where they're at to get to a different place. The third step is truly creating an organization that people are proud to be part of, right? This is when they go home and they talk to their friends. When they're standing at the water cooler or the coffee machine and they're talking to people, how do they communicate pride in the organization? It has 2 parts to it. 3 parts, actually. The first part, though, is establishing a clear operational framework. This talks about what are the priorities in a simple way. This is followed by something that people can relate to in common as an inspiring vision. And then taking those 2 and translating them into the organizational framework. Let me show some examples of this. In the case of Triumph, it was the SQDC format, but it also had to do with behavior that said there is absolutely no excuse for people to leave the plant and go home in a way any different than they came in. Hence, there is 0 tolerance for unsafe conditions, for unsafe behavior, and we must follow that. Extending that and opening, you talked about thinking in a bigger box, right? So thinking in a bigger box inside this meant to looking, for example, at traffic accidents, right? Which people had not looked at before, but which affects your productivity on a daily basis. I'm proud to say that today, the safety results in our plants, we have an average last month of 1 accident per plant per month, including traffic accidents. It took a lot of work because if you have a traffic accident, you have to go back to the service provider and say, what are you doing differently to come up with safe driving practices? Have you recertified your people? Because unless you keep pushing on that, you can't make it work. Eventually, the transport service provider says, you know what, I didn't like the fact that I had to do all this, but now I'm actually having less attrition, I'm having better productivity myself. So it's a win-win all around. The quality versus delivery is another important one that all of us deal with. It comes back to behavior. When you have that order that has to be shipped and it is not right, it is standing up and saying, I'll make the phone call to the CEO and let him know that I cannot risk the quality because that's going to affect our reputation. So yes, it's going to be late. I'm sorry about that. You can kill me for that one. But I'm not going to take the hit for not making the quality. Obviously, behind that, you have to come back and find what is the root cause and come up with preventive action. Because you can make that phone call a couple of times, but you can't keep making it all the time, right? If you look at the next one, the vision, the first part of the vision is not that different. This is the fundamental purpose of why a production center exists, a factory exists. But if you go to the second part of it, it really talks about how do we help people have detailed, real-time information, and how do we create a culture where people are able to delegate and make decisions at the lowest appropriate level. I'll show a couple of examples of that as we go along here. All of this is internal, right? But then you start looking at the external interface. And every one of the general managers in a production center is also dealing with the community. So when you talk about trying to be the employer of choice, you have to think beyond the employer of choice for the employees and think about who's the employer of choice for customs, who's the employer of choice for the government. It is somebody who is going to be paying their taxes and dealing with it in a proper way, and so on and so forth. So thinking about all of those stakeholders, especially now when corporate social responsibility is not fashionable, it is a necessity, is an important part of making all this work and reaching the conclusion that we are also helping our leaders to be seen outside the company and recognized as such. The third part of this is the organization framework. Notice I did not say organization chart. It's often easier to quickly make an organization chart, but I think we lose something if we don't engage the people who are affected in getting them into a discussion that says, why do we exist? We talked about our mission, we talked about our vision, but now let's talk about how we add value. And that's where what is in these boxes, it starts with saying, what is the purpose of the plant? And what are the main departments? And then what is the value-added portion of it? So as an example, if you look at manufacturing engineering, right? Driving continuous improvement is a core function of manufacturing engineering. That's how we add value. So doing this process and then having the leadership repeat this process down further sets the intellectual framework for then creating the organization chart itself. If I continue to number 4 then, all of this is good, but if you do not have results that you've delivered, as a leader, you start to find that you've lost the space in which you can maneuver, right? So in this case, some of what you're getting the results is by teaching the team how they can be on the floor, regardless of whether it is a production floor or a product development floor, and really understand how do we make our process more flexible? How do we empower decision making at the lowest level? Some examples of this. This one is changing the fundamental concept. On the first picture here, what you see is a sewing line. And it is a conveyor belt that has 50 people sitting around it. This has been the process for more than 120 years. It was extremely effective when we were making a few styles and large quantities of each of them. But the market changed, right? The market said, we, by the way, have 100,000 plus SKUs in our business. So when the market changed and we had to come up with smaller lot sizes, more changeovers, faster delivery, this became a huge barrier. And so the challenge was to convince all of the people in all of the plants to pull those conveyors out. In some cases, the conveyors were not that old. They still had useful life, but we had to pull them out. And you pull them out and come up with a reconfiguration. What is interesting when that happens, difficult as it is, when it does happen, and we've done this now across all of our production centers, what happens is, in addition to the stuff that you talk about when you go sit down with the CFO or the CEO, which is the tangible benefits, this is an example from one particular plant, what is the real sustainable benefit is at the bottom. The people start to develop more concepts. So in our business, because we used to have one line that was whether you're making a bra or a brief, it changed. And now the people start to come up with different concepts, with different sets of amount of people needed, U-shaped concepts, concepts that allowed you to see, flow, and react faster. The second example, we did implement SAP, and I would characterize the implementation as somewhere between, I would say, a disaster and a phenomenal disaster. It took about 2.5 years to clean it up in the production centers that were affected. Not because of any bad feeling on anybody, it is just that as you start implementing these things, if you really don't have good knowledge of the business process and you've translated it to the system process, you find out everything that can go wrong. In this particular case, one of the things that happened was the planning inside the plant then was handled by the Schedule++ module, and in a sense it became a computer-generated activity with a couple of people sitting in the room. What we ended up doing is creating a Kanban board, and literally each order that is coming through exists as a magnet in real time on a big board where every single day in every single production center globally, the cross-functional team gets together and actually manages the flow. So from the time the order is created, a magnet is created, till the time it is shipped out, you can literally see where it is. Is it in pre-production? Is it in production? Is it in shipping? And real-time decisions can be made if there is a problem to say, well, that was supposed to come from pre-production and is supposed to get to me tomorrow. That didn't happen. What else can I bring in? Now, there are some results again for this. There is all of these kinds of results. But in addition, when you look at the multiplicating effect of this across all the production centers, I call it the dock-to-dock light, where it starts when you have taken out the raw material from the raw material warehouse to when it comes out. The throughput improvement has been phenomenal, from something like 60 to 80 days down to 14 days. Number 5, I believe as a leader, there is no good time to develop talent. So from my heart, I would say that it is a 24/7 responsibility of a leader. And this is important because you never know when opportunities for synergies can come up. How you do this, it starts with clear operational objectives. I'm not sure if that text is visible all the way in the back, but what it says down there is country SWOT and strategy. This refers to every production center doing their macro strategy and updating it every year. That's how, for example, we could predict what is going to be happening with wages, we think, in certain countries over the next 3 to 5 years. Understanding what is the threat when in a location that was a greenfield site in the middle of a farm or farmland, suddenly the place has changed drastically over 5 years. We have other industries in there. That creates risk. What are we going to do differently? It's very important to do that every year and to connect that to the annual budget process, because that's where you're setting your resources in people and your resources in money. The next two, I'm going to get into an example on the next 2 pages, but this deals with making a commitment to people, their development, and tangible succession planning. And also having the kind of mentoring and development programs that help people to make the transition. So when you look at people development, there are 2 sides. There is the people side, which is the capturing people's hearts and minds, and that has 3 subsets, right? I think the text is a little bit messy, sorry about that, but it's aligning objectives, it's providing feedback and coaching, and it's facilitating career mentoring. This looks fairly standard, right? Every company has something on this. But if you are in a situation where your people have not actually done this, starting right from the leadership team, it's quite involved to actually take the time, work with people, do role plays and so on, and teach them how to do it. Equally important is protecting from the company's perspective future sustainability, which is where making sure your rewards and recognition and appreciation matches what is needed for the people, making sure that you're identifying and developing high potential and key talent, and finally, planning for succession and actually executing it. This is an example. It's just a working document that I pulled out and took the names out of, but for us, for each of the critical positions, we have a box that has the 5 key positions, if you can call it that. Is there somebody in that position? For example, a deputy GMM. Is there somebody in the position presently? Do we have somebody, if we have an emergency, who can come in and replace it? Is there a person who's ready to take over the job? Is there somebody who you're developing to be ready within a year? And somebody you're developing, it'll take more than 2 years. If you take that kind of an approach and then do it for, let's say, the top 10 critical positions, and you do it for all of the 10 production centers, you literally end up with 100 critical positions. And of that, I personally track the top 300, and the production centers who are doing the development also track the other 200 with their teams. So the last of these is to create a higher purpose. We talked a little bit about the lean journey and continuous improvement. You referenced that in the previous presentation. But we also need to be thinking about other things. In our business, in Triumph, as opposed to Ford, which is a different demographic, in Triumph, the majority of the employees are women. So getting engagement is very important, and doing programs that go as outreach to empower girls and women is something we do that is very important for us. Another one is environment and sustainability. I put the example of a program we just started with the L'Orange Institute in Zurich. And last but not the least, we have public-private partnerships we're starting with other companies on common non-competitive topics. The last slide then is what is the leadership journey? If I were to summarize the 6 points, I'd summarize them this way. We said we start with engage for impact, setting a different standard that consists of coming up with a first-time victory very quickly for the team and then replicating it. We talked about delivering the transformation, both from the standpoint of creating an organization that people are proud to be part of and delivering business results. And finally, from a sustainability perspective, we talked about developing talent as a 24/7 mentality and creating a higher purpose. I think I'm down to 17 seconds left, so at this point, I should probably stop. Probably time for one question. 6, 5, 4. Thank you very much for being patient for the last presentation here.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation as well.